And welcome back to Whiskey Politics. I'm Dave Sussman, your host and purveyor at whiskeypolitics.net. You can find us at America's Voice Television Network. You can also find our YouTube series at Whiskey Politics. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you can be updated on all upcoming interviews. And of course, our audio podcast on the Ricochet Audio Network. And if you're listening on iTunes, please don't forget to give us a 5-star rating, and that way others can find us. I just got back from the Reagan Library last night, had a great time. They've turned it into a winter wonderland, and as I'm walking around, I'm thinking the holidays are coming up. You're probably getting ready for the holidays yourself, which means you're probably getting ready to start tackling that big pile of books you bought over the last year and get into all of those. I know I certainly am. And to discuss all those books that have come out this last year, what's coming out next year, and also what it takes today to actually become an author in today's environment is Marji Ross. Marji's returning to us from Regnery Press. She is the president and publisher at Regnery Press for 20 years. Welcome back, Marji. How you doing?
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you. Thanks.
Appreciate you being here. So first of all, tell us a little bit about Regnery Press. What you guys are doing over there?
Sure.
The good work.
Well, Regnery Press, as you said, has been in business for over 70 years. We were started in 1947 in Chicago by Henry Regnery, hence the name. Moved to D.C. in the mid-'80s when his son Al Regnery took over. And then fast forward another 20 years, and I joined the company in 1999. And so coming up on my 20th anniversary. And then when Al was retiring as president and publisher, I took over and became president and publisher. And throughout our 70-year history, we have been dedicated to publishing great conservative books by great conservative authors. That's our mission. That's what we are dedicated to doing, and that's what we've been doing from the beginning. So in the early years of Regnery's existence, we published some of the probably best known, some of the foundational books in the modern conservative movement. We published William F. Buckley's first book, God and Man at Yale. Published Whittaker Chambers' Witness. We published The Conservative Mind by Russell Kirk, and continued through today, publishing some of the best known, most of the best known conservative authors and writers and thought leaders in the country.
Yeah, you guys certainly have an incredible long list of wonderful authors, many of whom I've read and some of whom we've had on the show. Mm-hmm. We've just had Sebastian Gorka, we've had John Tamney, too many to mention. Let me ask you this, because those are names that most people know, but you guys really do cater to a lot of different folks that may be unknown authors. I'm the unwilling victim of starting 3 books and never finishing them, much of which I think to myself, well, who's going to publish me? How would I even get out there? You guys work with a lot of unknown folks as well, don't you?
We do, and we love doing that. That's also part of our history, finding new conservative voices and launching the careers of some of the people who have gone on to have wonderful careers. We published Ann Coulter's very first book. We published Mark Levin's very first book. We have published, as I said, most of the well-known authors, many of whom started as not so well-known.
Right.
And that's something that's important to us in terms of keeping the conservative movement growing and always, with the fresh voices, always having a platform. And for many years, for decades, a lot of other publishers, especially New York-based publishers, wouldn't publish conservative authors. There was an audience for those books, but it was hard for a lot of conservative authors to find publishers who would be willing to publish their books. So that was a niche that we proudly filled. And like you said, even today, we are always searching for that next rising star. But at the same time, it's become very, very hard. It's become increasingly difficult for first-time authors to get traction, even if their book is published, for that book to really get off the runway. A lot of that has to do with the changes in the retail environment for books. Amazon is the 800-pound gorilla. They're the single largest seller now of books. And the bricks and mortar physical bookstores are really challenged on the business front. And the result for publishers and for authors is what we call the death of discovery, where it's just hard to discover a book unless you already know it exists. And most of the research suggests what we have found to be true, which is when you go to Amazon, you know what you're looking for. You're searching for an author or a title. You don't browse Amazon in the way, as much as we love selling books on Amazon, but you don't browse in the same way that you do when you go into a store. So that makes it really challenging for first-time authors and authors without a big platform.
I used to spend countless hours at bookstores, independents and the large chains as well. I can't remember the last time I've done that. If I want a book, I go and get it. And maybe Amazon will provide a few suggestions, which are like-minded authors on the exact same subjects. But I don't think that gives me a good variety these days. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I mean, they're unlikely to suggest something that is not already very popular, because that's the way their algorithm works. Their heat is. So the more traffic there is on a book, the more likely that book will be recommended to someone searching for something similar. So it's those sort of needle in a haystack books, those little gems that retailers, physical bookstores, especially independent bookstores, have been so good at showcasing. Those are much harder to find when you're searching.
Now a lot of folks will think of you're a publisher of conservative authors mostly. You do a lot of different types of books as well. I noticed that you have a number of names under Regnery too, correct? You do history and other things?
We publish, our core imprint, of course, is Regnery Press, which is our conservative political books, but we also have a line of history books, Regnery History. We have a line of kids books, Regnery Kids. We have some our more sort of intellectual, thoughtful, and classics line, which is Regnery Gateway. And we also have a fast-growing line of faith titles for Christian readers called Salem Books. Called Salem Books because we are owned now by Salem Media Group, and they're, of course, a huge player in the Christian radio market. So we're leaning into that brand by publishing a line of faith books called Salem Books.
Many of the talk show hosts on the Salem Media Network are also authors. I know that you just did something with Dennis Prager and some other folks.
Absolutely. That's one of the great ways for us to leverage not only our, belonging to the Salem family, but also these huge platforms that the authors have. So just this year, we've published a big book by Dennis. You want me to do a little show and tell? I'll show you. We published a big new book by Dennis Prager called The Rational Bible. This is Exodus, but this is one of 5. He's doing all 5 books of the Torah. So the next book coming out next year is called The Rational Bible, Genesis. I do know that Genesis came before Exodus. Long story, but in any event, we've got Exodus
I learned that.
out. We've got Exodus out now. And the reason for that, real quick side note, is because Dennis Prager said the most important part of the entire Torah is the 10 Commandments. It's the moral code of all of Western civilization. That's in Exodus. That's where he wanted to start. This is an amazing book. It's done incredibly well, and it's basically a commentary on the entire book of Exodus. Beautifully done. He's an amazing scholar, really interesting thinker. So that's been one of our Salem radio host books. But one you may not know, and I'll grab this from my little showcase here, Eric Metaxas, another Salem syndicated radio host, did a really fun book for us called, as you can see, Donald Drains the Swamp. And it's kind of a lighthearted, tongue-in-cheek book about a caveman who goes to solve the problems urged on by his fellow cavemen to come drain the swamp of the swamp creatures. And it's this really cute, as you can see, book of Donald the caveman coming to save the day from the swamp creatures. and draining the swamp of all the money so that people can live happily ever after. Also kind of a surprise hit for us, doing really well.
And a book like that, which is really, geared towards kids, gets a lot of adults buying them too, don't they?
Absolutely. It's a fun book that people, again, for the season, it's awfully nice to have a book that's not yelling and screaming at you. It invites you to laugh at yourself and at each other, and take a more lighthearted look at culture. And then, as you may know, Sebastian Gorka is about to become a Salem syndicated radio host. He's announced that they're launching a new show with Gorka starting January 1. So he will be our third syndicated radio host author. Another author whom we published his very first book called Defeating Jihad a couple of years ago. Huge hit. He's a terrific author, and a very serious subject. This book, Why We Fight, we just brought this out last month. Really compelling argument about not just who our enemies are and why they want to sort of defeat Western civilization, but regaining not just the ability to fight, but the will to fight, and understanding what it is we fight for.
Right. I want to get more into that. We did have Sebastian on the show recently, and we did talk about that brand new book. And I want to get into all of this and your favorite books of 2018 and what's upcoming in 2019 and how you can become an author with Regnery right after the break. We'll be right back with Marji Ross. And welcome back to Whiskey Politics. Dave Sussman here. And we are delighted to have with us Marji Ross, who is the publisher and president of Regnery Press. Where can folks find you guys right now?
Thanks. Easiest way to find us is online, regnery.com. You can also just type in conservativebooks.com, because that's where
conservativebooks.com.
Yeah.
Okay. You got a lot of books that are upcoming, and some of the books that are on my list to read this year. In fact, we're trying to speak with a couple of your authors about bringing them on the show. One is George Gilder, who you've got up there on the shelf right there. It's what is it called? Life After Google?
Life After Google. One of the many amazing talents of George Gilder is coming up with great titles. Every time he tells me about a new book, I think, that is a fantastic title. And as you can imagine, titling is one of the most difficult and important things that a publisher can do. And I often play the game myself, where I see a book and I think, what would a better title be? But we work with a lot of authors who rely on us to help them brainstorm about titles. We love to do that.
So if I was an author and I submitted a manuscript to you, and how much you guys are publishers, how much work do you guys do when somebody sends in a manuscript to you regarding the title, editing, chapter orders, things like that? What's the process?
It totally depends, of course, on the shape the book is in when it comes in, and usually that depends on how experienced the writer is. We work, as you said, with a lot of people who are very well established on media, very well established as writers, but maybe haven't ever done a book before. And doing a book is its own unique challenge. As you pointed out, it's a lot of work. It takes a long time. So we try to work alongside our authors. And on the writing front, we'll do as much as an author will let us, and as is needed. Everything from, going step by step through the outline and figuring out the sort of story arc of the book. What's the argument that you're trying to make, and then what's the logical and most compelling way to structure that argument. We work a lot, as I mentioned, on titles, and we collaborate with authors. We brainstorm. I would say probably 80% of the time, the title that the author proposes or starts out with or is on the proposal is not the title that we end up using. So we invest a lot of creativity and time in that. And especially today where, again, most of the buying is done online and most of the recognition of a book is going to be hearing the author talk about it on your show, on other shows like yours. You need to have a title that is both simple and yet memorable. So something like Life After Google is a perfect example. It's intriguing, remember it, but you're also going to wonder, life after Google? Is there life after Google? I don't know. What does that mean? And that sets you off on, hopefully, being intrigued with what the author has to say.
Yeah, and like a 3-word title like that really does hook you, because it's quick, it's concise, you can see it all in one line. I think editors, generally speaking, will do a lot of that for their writers, no matter what whether it's a publishing house or whether it's a site like Ricochet, where a lot of folks listening to this may be wondering, how do I get published? I write very, very well. What is that process? Do you just have people send you manuscripts? What happens?
Well, usually I tell people that the worst thing to do is to send me a completed manuscript for 2 reasons.
Okay.
One, it's a big thump land on my desk. It looks like a reading assignment. Most publishers don't have time to read an entire manuscript if they're not already sold on the book. So, but the second reason that I tell people, discourage people from sending an entire manuscript, is there's a subtle suggestion when a publisher receives a completed manuscript that the author thinks they're done. And it makes it a little bit harder for an editor and a publisher to influence what the author is going to say, to help shape that manuscript, to help edit and change and maybe throw stuff out and add new stuff in. When an author has invested the time that it takes to write, 50 or 60 or 70,000 words, it's a little less inviting to an editor to say, and now please tell me, what half of this you want to throw in the trash and start over. So I'd much rather get, and I think it's better for an author to send just a proposal, maybe a sample chapter, definitely a table of contents, but give me your pitch. Tell me why this idea is interesting, is unique, is relevant, is timely. Why are you the right person to write it? And who is it for? Who are your readers? Who do you have in mind? Those are the critical questions that a proposal should answer, and that an editor and a publisher have when they take a look at an idea.
Does somebody need to be well known to be considered by you?
It certainly makes it easier. It certainly makes your chances better that we will say yes, and that any publisher will say yes. But it's not an absolute. Like I said, we've published authors who are just starting out, new voices and emerging voices on the scene. And if you have a really compelling idea and a really good reason why you're the best person to write it, and the ability to promote it, we'll consider it.
I had a friend, she wrote a book, completely different. It wasn't politics. It was to do with personal health and women's empowerment. And it was with another publisher. And she contacted me. This is about 4 or 5 years ago. And without saying the name, I'll say the initials. It was a publisher by the initials HC. And she got a $50,000 advance. I was surprised by that. How common is that today in publishing?
It is less common for an unknown author to get a big advance. Like everything else, the retail market and the book publishing market has become much more kind of just in time, much more competitive. And there's a phenomenon that we've seen that is sort of the disappearance of the middle. You think about a lot of things, the middle has kind of disappeared. And so too in book publishing, you've got the big celebrity authors who are getting 6 figures or 7 figures as an advance. Then you've got the just starting people getting maybe nothing or very small amounts. And that middle range is the toughest range now, because you've got established authors who kind of think they ought to be getting, $50,000, but the sales no longer justify that. So there's become a lot of pressure in that middle grade.
Well, let's talk more about it, and also what's upcoming for the publishing industry in 2019. And we're continuing here with Marji Ross, president and publisher at Regnery Press, and we'll be right back with Whiskey Politics. And welcome back, Whiskey Politics. Dave Sussman and Marji Ross over at Regnery Press is talking about how you can become an author. And if you've got that great idea and want to submit an idea, how to do that. And also some of the great books that just came out this last year and what's upcoming in 2019. You got some great books there on the table next to you. And you just rearranged during the break there. You have Vice President Pence. He's got a great book out. You want to talk about that?
I will talk about this. One of my favorite projects this year was working with Charlotte Pence, the second lady. Karen Pence, the second lady. Charlotte Pence,
yes,
the second daughter, I guess we'll call her. So this is Mike Pence's wife and middle daughter. And they collaborated together on this really wonderful project, which was a book for children, picture book. As I said, we do we have a line of children's books called Regnery Kids, and this is a book that we brought out earlier this year called A Day in the Life of the Vice President. It is narrated by let's call it the second bunny. This is Marlon Bundo, real life rabbit. You can see a picture of him with Karen and Charlotte on the back. I have met Marlon Bundo. He's a real life bunny, and he takes kids through what the vice president's job is. And Karen, I went to an event last week where she was speaking about the book, and she said, we realized that when Mike was chosen to run on the ticket, we didn't know a whole lot about what the actual day-to-day duties of the vice president were. And so we thought most people probably don't. What a great thing to teach kids that the vice president has a really important job and to help explain what it is. So as you see, there's a really fun day in the life of the vice president where Marlon the bunny hops through and takes you all throughout the vice president's job. And one of the cool things is that Karen Pence is a very accomplished, award-winning watercolor artist. So she painted all of the original artwork in this book. This has been a big success. We've got a lot of sales on it, and it was so successful that we are doing 2 more Marlon Bundo books. We're doing a book in the spring called A Day in the Nation's Capital, where we visit all the national monuments and historic sites in Washington, D.C., help kids understand what's all throughout the city. And then we also have a Christmas book coming next Christmas, 2019 Christmas, called Marlon Bundo's Best Christmas Ever.
You talk about the kids. You guys actually have a line for kids. And what are you seeing right now? I was an avid reader growing up as a kid. Now, this is 20 years before even there was an internet to talk about.
Right.
So that was my imagination. That's where I escaped to, and I read hundreds and hundreds of books without exaggeration. I was an avid reader. What are we seeing right now today with kids? Is there a trend?
Well, as you can imagine, it's the trend is down, unfortunately. Kids are addicted to their devices and typically have been trained to have a short attention span, to be very good multitaskers. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Kids can handle a lot of incoming data and information all at once because that's the way they've grown up with, devices and mobile devices and phones and tablets that are doing lots of different things at the same time. And there's some research about how the brain even grows and evolves with that kind of stimuli. But it's certainly true that we as book publishers have seen a falling rate of reading with kids, certainly reading physical books. But I think that there is a huge opportunity a challenge to publishers to make sure that our books are interesting, are entertaining, keep a kid's imagination, spark imagination, but keeps their interest. And that's our job. I'm not looking for book publishing to be easier. I'm looking for us to step up to make books that kids want to read, and topics and presentations that are, that will grab their attention. Overall, for what it's worth, my parenting advice, people ask me, how do you get kids to read? And I have parents all the time saying, my kids won't read. What do I do to get my kids to read? And my answer is read. My experience as a parent and my experience with other kids, I have 3 daughters of my own, kids do what their parents do. Kids love to copy their parents. They say they don't, but they do. They model everything their parents do, especially when they're young. If you read in your household, if reading is a fun activity in your household, if it's valued, if books are valued, if books are around and important, if you read, your kids are more likely to read.
It's really interesting you said that, because my dad was also an avid reader. He had bookshelves full of books,
Right.
and I read many of them, especially the older I got. I found some of the books that I thought were boring and stodgy as
Yeah.
a kid were actually quite interesting.
Exactly. And my daughters all are avid readers. They're in, college and grad school now, and they
Yeah, yeah.
love.
So, are you concerned, however, that we've got an entire generation now, maybe the millennials and the I forget the Gen X, Gen Y after? Do you have a concern that we've got a whole generation that's now growing up that isn't reading, and what does that do for the publishing world?
Well, I think it's a challenge. I mean, I think it's probably an exaggeration to say none of them read. They do. There's still a lot of kids reading. There's still a lot of kids' books being read. But as I said, it's a sort of marketing challenge and a creativity challenge to make sure as publishers that we're providing books and content that they like. And in the end, I'm pretty agnostic as to whether anyone, kid or adult, is reading an ebook versus a print book. As
Right.
Is a really important thing to do. It's really important to our business, but it's important to our culture too, and our country and our world. So as long as people are reading, I don't mind if they're reading it on their phone, their tablet, their Kindle, their Nook, or in a hardcover book. As long as they're reading, I'm happy.
As a publisher, do you think some of the biggest changes we've seen in publishing are just the vehicle of delivery, as you just talk about, Nook, Kindles, things like this, or are there other changes that are on the horizon for publishing in that delivery format?
Well, I think the change is less the format that people are reading in as it is in the delivery system and the venue of sale. So as we were talking about before, if Amazon succeeds in crowding out most of the physical bookstores, to me the challenge is not that people are reading a book or an ebook. It is more that the discovery of new books and new voices is really under pressure. And that's the thing that we lose, I think, that sort of immersing yourself in a world of books, whether it's at a library or a bookstore, so that you sort of fall in love with books. I think it's harder to fall in love with books if you only experience them on your on digitally. It's harder to fall in love with books than if you experience.
You walk into a Barnes & Noble or any other store today, I always find myself doing an impulse buy almost every time. It's like going to Target for one thing and walking out with 50, right?
Counting on that.
And so when you go to Amazon, that impulse buy isn't really so much there. And it's usually because there's not a table of new authors or something right at the entrance, right?
Right.
That's how I found Vince Flynn, one of my favorite, fiction authors, and rest in peace. Before he became famous, I mean, his first couple of books to me were just amazing, and I loved it. And it was like this closely held secret. It's like, oh, I got this great author. You guys got to read it. That word of mouth. Does that exist today?
No, it's much harder to exist. It's for exactly the reason you say. And I also think there is a subtle influence when you walk into a bookstore. They still exist. When you walk into a bookstore, your pace slows down a little bit. You take a little bit more time to experience a book and an idea and an author. So I think there's this healthy slowing down that you get when you experience books physically and when you walk into a bookstore. So I'm a big fan of keeping physical bookstores healthy and alive and thriving, and encourage your readers to support their local. Just like we shop local, it's really important to do that with books.
Yeah, I do too. Last question of this segment, and then we're going to take a break and get back into some of the books that you highly recommend for 2018 and what's upcoming in 2019. You talk about Amazon obviously being the 800-pound gorilla. We hear a lot of discussion today about bias in social media. Do you find there's bias in publishing media online, such as Amazon, where they will maybe suppress certain genres, maybe conservative books?
You know, that's very interesting. Actually, I don't find that on Amazon, I will say.
Okay.
Amazon is a technology company. It's not a book, certainly not a book company. It's certainly not a book company anymore, if it ever was, but because they sell everything. But it's a technology company, and so it is completely driven by algorithms, and it is so it's much harder for there to be a sort of human bias in what they show you and what they feature. Now, having said that, they're also very careful not to offend, and you know, that is obviously that's a subjective thing, but they a lot of the marketing programs that are open to publishers are not open to political publishers of any persuasion. So they're careful, they say they try to be careful not to send, for instance, recommendations to people's emails for political books. Now, having said that, I would recall getting a recommendation for Hillary Clinton's memoir. I'm like, is this not a political book? It was a memoir, not political. I'm like, okay, I'm going to buy that. But the bias comes, there's definitely a bias in social media. We know it, we see it. In fact, we're doing a book on it next year. So, and that can have a really insidious influence, obviously, on what people read, because it's what they hear about and it's what they think is popular. So, so that's where we see the bias, but really not so much on Amazon, happily.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. It's where free markets prevail.
Right.
And speaking about free markets, we want to talk about some of your favorites that exist out there that people should go and find, and also what is upcoming in 2019. So we'll be right back with Marji Ross at Regnery Press.
Thanks.
And welcome back to Whiskey Politics. Dave Sussman here with Marji Ross, who is the publisher and president at Regnery Press, and we're having a delightful discussion about the publishing industry and what's been going on, some of the trends that we're seeing, how to become an author, and also now what I'd love to talk about is some of the recommendations that you have, Marji, regarding what you need to pick up for the holidays and into the new year that has been published in 2018, and also what's coming up in 2019.
Sure. Well, thank you. Publishers always love that question. So special for you, special for Whiskey Politics, I have to tell you about Drinking with St. Nick. Now, this is a really fun book. We just published it about for the holiday season. It came out, I think, at the end of October. It's sort of a spin-off book from a previous book that was also very successful called Drinking with the Saints. So this is Drinking with St. Nick. It is Christmas cocktails for sinners and saints. It is really, really fun little book with all kinds of little drinking recipes and little fun stories for the...
So the stories behind the recipes.
Stories behind the recipes. Christmas Punch is the successor of wassail, which is a medieval combination of hot ale or mead, roasted apples, eggs, nutmeg, and flowering pieces of toast.
Oh, that sounds good.
So
I could have used that last night at the Reagan Library. I had a hot chocolate with some Jamesons. That sounds better.
I love that too. So, so this is the perfect stocking stuffer for anyone on your list. And, you know, we've got books, as you pointed out, in a bunch of different genres. You know, one of the books that we're seeing doing really well this holiday season is, of course, the book that I showed you earlier, this really beautiful volume, Prager's Exodus. For the lighthearted among you, Donald Drains the Swamp. And, for the history lovers, I don't think we've talked about this one. I'll grab it. This is wonderful. This is for all the animal lovers, too. War Animals. This is a book by a New York Times bestselling author, Robin Hutton. I can't believe I just said New York Times because we don't talk about the New York Times anymore. The national best-selling author, Robin Hutton. And this is a book about war heroes from World War II, animal heroes from World War II.
Now, is that Regnery? Is that in your gateway line?
This is in our history line. It's a World War II book. And I'll tell you, we have Judy, the POW dog, Cher Ami, the pigeon. We have a hero pigeon. We've got Beauty, the digging dog who sniffed out bombs. We have Olga, the horse who braved the bombings. We have Simon, the war cat. And we have a dog. There was a dog who parachuted in with the soldiers to protect them and sniff out landmines.
Yeah, yeah. And what do you have coming up in 2019 that you're excited about?
So 2019, we're excited about a bunch of repeat authors. We've got a new book with another book with Dennis Prager. We've got more Marlon Bundo books with the Pence Ladies. We've got another Sebastian Gorka book coming out. We
just had Noah Rothman come up. I guess he's got a book coming out next month.
Noah Rothman book called Unjust. Yeah. About social justice, which, as he points out, is neither social nor just.
Right.
Got another David Limbaugh book coming out. This is our newest David Limbaugh book, which everyone should know about. Jesus is Risen. Beautiful book about Paul and the early church. And we've got probably our first book out in 2019 will be a book with Luke Rosiak called Obstruction of Justice, about a big scandal involving the deep state.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a subject. Every time somebody brings out a book on that, I think to myself, they've written this incredible book. It probably took them a year, and news is just coming out every single day. That's brand new.
Yeah.
You ever have authors, real quick question for you on this, do you ever have authors that have written a book like that that's so timely, that's right now, that want to do an update or anything?
Yes, we do. And in fact, one of the things that has made Regnery, I think, really successful is that we became very, very good at publishing books incredibly fast. And it wasn't because we were smarter. It was because we had to. We do a lot of news breaking books. And I remember the editor of The Atlantic said, I don't understand how you guys publish a book faster than we publish a magazine, which in a lot of cases is true.
Wow,
yeah.
That fast.
We can publish books, if we have to, really, really quickly. And that's because, if we have breaking news, we want to get it out before somebody scoops us. And we've been pretty successful at doing that with books. It's tough. But it's a core competency that we have that we've developed just because we're doing news breaking books. And then, with the advent of ebooks, you can update anything you want virtually in real time. So we've also had instances where we have a book that's out, something new and important happens, we can go in, update the ebook, and get that back up for sale.
What percentage of your books are sold today via hardcover or paperback versus ebooks?
About 25% ebook, 75% print. And I have to tell you, that's standard for the industry. I think a lot of people think, oh my God, no print books are being sold anymore. They're all e. But it's about 75-25 overall.
Yeah. Well, Marji, greatly appreciate you taking the time and sharing with us, not just about the publishing world and Regnery, but upcoming authors, and really do appreciate it. Again, where can folks find you and the Regnery Press?
Regnery.com, that's Regnery.com, or just go to conservativebooks.com.
Great. And we'll definitely check it out. And I've got a half a dozen books I need to read that came out in the last few months from you guys. So greatly appreciate you taking the time. And folks, don't forget to continue to follow us at America's Voice News, as well as YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and the Ricochet Audio Network. And again, very special thanks to Marji Ross, President and Publisher at Regnery Press. And we'll be back again very soon at Whiskey Politics.